Welcome to Wellness Radio with Dr. Jeanette-Gallagher as your host. Her show discusses topics of health, wellness, and spirituality, and is about discovering your place in this great universe, from your cells to the cosmos. Along with her guest, in casual conversation, she strives to ask the difficult questions that may be holding you back from a vibrant life, and shares new ideas that may inspire you to make a change in your life that you only can see in your dreams. And now, here is Dr. Jeanette-Gallagher.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wellness Radio. This is Dr. Jeanette-Gallagher, and it's a pleasure to have you with us here this evening. Tonight we are going to be talking about our spiritual journey. How are we walking through our life? Who are we being guided to partner with? What is our journey all about? What are all of those bumps and bruises along the way? And we can still celebrate all of the joyous moments. A spiritual journey is truly not something that you are climbing a ladder to get to a plateau, then you're redeemed and you're all good. Spiritual journey is about learning who we are as humans, what we are about as spiritual beings, who is with us in this world. Is it God, source energy, or a spiritual being, whatever you wish to be able to call it in your realm? However, the idea is to understand something, somewhere, somehow gave us the breath of life. And what is that all about? And what happens in our life? How do we navigate? What are these things that are coming at us? How do we stop for a moment to be quiet and listen? Where is the guidance coming from? Who is it coming from? And can we trust it? Today my guest is Emil Toth. His book is Walk With Me, in Swamps, on Savannas, Up Mountains to God, as a spiritual memoir. Emil, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's just great to be here, Dr. Jeanette.
So glad to have you, Emil. Don't you think that our spiritual journey, as you've shared in your book, is truly about bumps and bruises, great times, but you look back at it and you go, wow, I never really understood the gift until today.
Yes, absolutely, because along the way you never know what path you're going to take, and the twists and turns of each path leads you eventually to the source.
Yes, absolutely. You know, Emil, you and I are of older age, so this will be a great adventure. We'll walk through our lives as we share our stories. However, I think also, too, it's very important to understand is that many people have had stories and they've been afraid to share them. They've held them dearly to their deathbed. They said, I don't want to say that. I sound crazy. It seems like, oh, I shouldn't say that stuff. I'm already nobody talking to me in the family or my work or people that I know. Don't you think that that's what happens when we start speaking about our spiritual journey to many?
Oh, yes. When I really started on the path, when I was 33, I started talking about it to the family, and all of a sudden I became the black sheep, the outcast.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's so interesting that you say that because, you know, I've pretty much been open my entire life, out of body, seen ghosts, seen angels, all of that, you know, definitely know it's guided, know I'm here in service this entire lifetime. And when I stepped into that path, I hit all kinds of people. You know, I mean, I always felt that I was kind of like involved in things and doing things in my life. However, when I look back in retrospect, I always see myself just watching a movie, and I'm separated from it. And I think that's so interesting to understand it that way because that says, wow, you really were in service, shining light, and you didn't get involved in a lot of that schmutz that goes on. Do you think perhaps people have many versions of how their journey unfolded?
Well, I believe in many lives currently led, you know, the possibilities of having all of these lives going on concurrently. So, yes, I think we have very varied lives, and all the choices that you make whether it's going to make a left turn or a right turn or say yes or no to somebody. All of those things impinge upon what happens to you.
You know, it's interesting you said about having them concurrently going. I had said to someone yesterday, my diet has been really strange. One day it's all jelly beans all day. The next day it's all vegetables. So I wonder which lifetime I was in those days. We laughed about it.
I hear you. You know, you have to laugh sometimes because as the tragic things come up in your life, you begin to wonder, why is that going on? You know, once you become a little bit more spiritual in nature, you begin to look at those things and say, aha, that's where it's leading me. And this is where I have to learn.
You know, it's interesting. You also shared about being sick and your loved one, you know, you said, where's the compassion? I don't understand it. I don't see it. And definitely, I think that you and I, being of older age, there were many generations where people were shut down and they were not allowed to express compassion, or they were never taught it, or they never were engaged in it with another person. Don't you think post-war, a lot of people were still in that violent kind of aspect in their lives, and they were pretty much just looking at survival for several decades?
Oh, yeah. And I learned from my mother and father that they didn't tell the stories that they needed to me, so I would know what their life was about, the hardships that they went through. You know, my dad, his family were actually living as, not sharecroppers, serfs back in the old country. And there was 5 generations that lived there. They're almost like slaves. The only thing that they were able to do was move off, you know, where a slave couldn't move off the ranch or the plantation. So, yeah, they had a hard time, and they didn't discuss things with me. So, you know, now I'm sharing everything I can with my family, my grandkids, because it's wonderful to take them out to dinner or lunch and just let them know who I am and who my mom and dad are.
Right. Do you think of that, perhaps, as we look at it, we're doing healing work on our ancestral lineage, that you and I were called to do something differently and to be able to heal it going forward? Because if you look back at it, I don't think our ancestors really had opportunities to be able to be philosophically, spiritually awakened, to understand or reflect or even have a mind to think about things when they were just going day to day. So you and I, now in this year 2023, are really being called to step up to change the dogma and the stories.
Oh, yeah. I mean, my mom and dad, you know, just existed. I mean, that's... Yeah. And then when they came here to America, and he worked hard. They had a hard life and not much money. And so I have this opportunity now to share what I've learned during my lifetime. And then I've also found out that I've been a storyteller in other lifetimes. So I'm a historian. So this just, you know, melts in with what I'm doing right now. So, yes, I would say we have this opportunity where they didn't have it. They were survivalists. We aren't survivalists. We are sharing what we've learned.
Here's one point that I've noticed, though, also, too, Emil, is that sometimes when we look back in reflection at our lives or our family members, and we say, oh, it must have been so hard and it was terrible and blah, blah, blah. But we forget we're looking at it with our eyes of today. Back in those days, they didn't believe that it was so hard because everybody was like the same. You know, everybody didn't have food on the table. You know, everybody didn't have a house. Everybody was working, you know, in the mines and stuff or whatever. So I think sometimes it's to be super cautious with our stories in that we reflect the time that we are talking about also in retrospect with the other people there too and their experiences. Because otherwise we can get pretty stuck in a whole lot of shame, guilt, remorse, and regret. Don't you think?
Well, yeah, I think a lot of people do. But in my perspective, I've looked at things and said, well, you know, I don't want to dwell on those negative things that have happened in my life or with what happened to my dad, you know, and his family being serfs for 5 generations. I'm looking at this great opportunity that he had after the First World War to come into contact with people and said, hey, America is great. You can leave your home and go to America and make a good life. So that's what he did. So they were very opportunistic. And I'm opportunistic in a different way because I'm learning something and I'm trying to share that with, my kids, my grandkids, and even with my novels and my stories. I think my grandkids said, well, why would you want to come out with a book like this, which is so radical and so revealing, in your old age? I said, well, this is my story. I want you to know who I am and the sufferings that I've gone through, but the glories that I've gone through, too.
Right. I think also, too, there's a very distinct reference in storytelling. When you go through it, you have one story. A few years later, you have another reflection on it. And several decades later, you can look back at it and go, wow, it's time to flip the coin. It's time to see it with different eyes, for its reality, for what has happened, and potentially see how it was maybe a gift, I know there's many instances people would say to me things like, hey, you need to go to the doctor. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to go to the doctor. What am I going to go to the doctor for? I am a doctor. It doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? So they're like, oh, no, you need to go to the doctor. You need to go to the doctor. So one time I went, and it was so interesting because I was there and I got my blood work done, and I was talking to the doctor, blah, 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 back and forth. And I came away, and I kind of said, well, that was a worthless experience. I didn't get anything out of it. He didn't know what I was talking about. That was my immediate response. But then several decades later, I looked back at it, and I said, I went because I had to teach him something that day. It wasn't about me. You forget sometimes that you're, quote, in service. And when you step into the human part of it, say, whoa, who am I teaching today? Who am I sharing with today? What am I saying today? And I think if we could see that part of it, then we kind of really crave those experiences, don't you think?
Oh, yes. I mean, I know for a fact that I've said some things, and my daughter and my granddaughter will say, 10 years after the fact, do you remember, Dad, when you said this, or Grandpa, when you said that? And this really helped me out. I said, no, I didn't at the time, because you're just sharing what you have, your knowledge. You're trying to guide them in some way, and all of a sudden it makes a big impact on them. But you're just talking away, like you normally do, trying to help people. Right.
Also, too, you share in your book, you said, I've learned there are several ways I receive love and how to react to it. And let's talk about the word love for a minute. Love has so many connotations. It has so many definitions. And then I think really we have to separate it out and say, is it unconditional or is it conditional? Because in most of our experiences as a human, it's conditional. I show you love, you show me love in return. I show you love, you don't show me love in return. You know what I mean? I don't want your love, you need to go away. Different types of things like that. But when it's unconditional with source energy, there's no conversation that has to be had. There's no words that need to be said. And generally, it's in silence that you can find it. So can you share your thoughts on conditional and unconditional love?
Well, I'd like to cover that part where there's no talking. I met my guru, and at that instant that I looked into her eyes, I felt not only her love, but I believe beloved's love, because I just broke out in sobs, and I just kept telling her, Mother, I love you. Mother, I love you. This is the first time I met the woman. So there's times when you go past the normal experience of, meeting a person, that there's something very deep that's going on, something very spiritual, and something that other people don't experience, but possibly would like to. Love takes so many different forms, and I like to tell everybody that I love them. But my guru never told me She didn't have to, because I could feel it. I mean, I was weeping all the time when I was with her, and weeping in bhakti, weeping because of the devotion I had to her, the love that I felt, the beloved that I felt within her.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's truly about being able to say it's something coming through someone. It's not about them as the human. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's,
yes, absolutely.
It's so important to say that, because a lot of times we see people going and having relationships with their gurus, their teachers, their mentors, and we're going, okay, you are getting connected to the human story. Can you diverge yourself of that and just step yourself up another level? Don't you think?
Yes. And one thing I must mention about my guru, she never told me to do this or that. I said, well, what do I have to be? And what do I have to do to be your initiate? She said, repeat your mantra 108 times a day. And that's it. She didn't tell me to be good. She didn't tell me this is the way to God. This is what you have to do to be happy, or these are the experiences you need to have. Nothing like that. Because she had, I think, the sense that beloved was in me as well, and would show me the way.
Right. Well, I think if we look at it, if you've got, just as I shared in the opening, if you have the breath, it had to come from somewhere, so everybody's got it in us. It's just a decision whether or not we wish to tune to that channel. You know, remember the old AM, FM radios? You had to flip the button to be able to hear the other one? Yeah. You can never listen to FM if you run AM if you didn't push the button. So I think the idea is, can you actually tune into something and hear it? If you're on another channel, you can't. So sometimes people are not ready. They're not able to. And no matter how much you try to share it with them, they just can't see it because they're stuck on that AM frequency. Yeah, and what does it take to get to the FM frequency, right?
Yeah. I find if your mind's busy worrying about this or work, or you're a socialite, you're talking about that, you're going out drinking, going out bowling, or watching the ball games, you're not focusing on your inner self. And that's where you're going to find that spirituality within you. That's where you're going to have these experiences like you and I have had. You know, but if they don't want to pay attention, if they don't switch over to FM, well, then they're going to stay stuck on AM all the time. And they'll never have those kind of experiences that you and I have had with beloved.
I think it's all about the idea, are you living an outside world or an inside world? You know, so many times people will say to me, well, you know, you don't go out and you don't go do this, and don't you want to go do that? And I'm like, it doesn't even show up in my mind to be able to want to. It's sort of like I don't have a bucket list. You know, I don't have regrets. I don't have any of that, you know, and I've even said, you know, when I write up my obituary, here it is. She came, she loved, she lost, and she's gone. And that's it. It's sort of like, what else do you want to say? I don't feel connected to any of that other, whatever that is out there. Do you know what I mean? Because like I said, I've been in this space and time for so long. And I think it's important to share with others our stories, because there's many different levels, and people can say, oh, is that where I'm maybe guided to? Is that maybe what it looks like? And then it opens up, they say, well, gosh, you know, I didn't know it. I had been in that space already. I just didn't recognize it. You know, like, I don't know about you, Emil, but myself, you know, like seeing ghosts and angels and spirits and all that other stuff, and hearing things and knowing things, foreknowing and all. And that was very common to me. And as I got older, I didn't know that other people didn't have those abilities. I was shocked to find out. I would be walking around, do you hear this? Do you see that? And they're like, no. And finally I had to realize, gosh, I have been so different this whole lifetime, and that was a gift instead of a curse. Do you think perhaps a lot of your adventures were very similar in experience?
Well, you know, once I read the Edgar Casey's book, the prophet, then that kind of got me thinking. So I opened myself up to other possibilities, and gradually I became less gregarious. I didn't want to go drinking. I didn't want to be with big crowds. I wanted to have one-on-one relationships. I wanted to sit down and talk with people and ask them about their spiritual life, find out who they were, have a real dialogue with them, not just tell them my stuff. Like kids usually do. They'll come home and say, Dad or Mom, this is what I did. And they'll rattle on for half an hour about it, never thinking that, well, what did Mom and Dad do? Can I ask them something so we get in a conversation? Well, that's what happened to me. I just kind of left the society behind, the social life, and I got into this spiritual spot where that's what, tickled me. That's what drove me. That's what made me fulfilled.
Yeah. It definitely, sometimes people will say, well, how can you tell when you're starting to open up to God, to source energy? I always use these words. Many of our listeners have different versions. And how can you tell when you're connecting or you're starting to open up to this way of thinking or being guided? And I always say, for me, it's just a sense of sitting just still for 2 seconds and breathing in and out and just putting my hand to my heart and breathing again, and that's my connection. Now, many others find it through meditation. They find it through sitting with a candle and gently praying. Others do it with mantras, as you have. Others do it with story or with reading or journaling or whatever. It's just that mine is quick, it's rapid, it's there, and it's never been questioned. But I think sometimes the idea is that people will question it because they don't know what it feels like. Do you think it's important to share many versions of what it may or may not sense to be for others to be able to say, ooh?
Yeah, everybody has a different experience with God. My experience is different than yours and Sally's and Bob's. And it can come on instantaneously. I can be talking with my grandkids, telling that I had this episode that I was writing in my novels, and all of a sudden, I had this experience where I started to weep because I made a connection with Beloved. Or I can look in my grandchild's eyes, and all of a sudden, Beloved's there, and I'm weeping in front of everybody. I don't care anymore. When I'm making a connection to God, I don't want to hide it. I'm the type with bhakti, you cry because you're so close. You're so loving. You're so in need of that connection, that love, that awe that you feel. So I'm all of what I used to be was gone. So now it's completely different, and I want to share it because other people don't have that experience. In fact, I shared what was happening to me to my spiritual teacher, who was my meditation teacher for 20 years. I sat down with her and I told her, I said, I came back from India. I had this guru, and I said, I was having these wonderful experiences, and I started bawling in front of her. I sobbed, and I told her, I said, Frances, I love you. I love you. She didn't know what to make of me. I don't think she ever saw anybody react to bhakti, in the way I did. And so she was dumbfounded. She didn't know what to say. But, everybody has a different way they express their connection to God, and that's mine. Bhakti is my path.
Yeah. Mine, I was a dental hygienist for several years, almost 2 decades, and I would always remember people would say to me, oh, that's your job. Tell me about your job. What is your job? That kind of thing, right? And then you get others that would say, oh, that's an awful job. Why would you do that? All that kind of human story. However, what I realized in reflection was that every single person that I put the chair back to be able to clean their teeth, that I would always be looking into their eyes for 5 to 10 seconds. So what I realized my job was to connect with souls in that level, and that was it. It had nothing to do with the job that I was doing. It had to do with the in-service that I was doing. And I looked back on it, and then I was able to see the gift in those decades versus turning around and saying, oh, my gosh, I have terrible back pain now. It's a result of all of that work, and my eyes, I don't see well because blah, blah, blah. But it's sort of like, forget it. Yes, I've got those ailments. They don't go away. They're there. However, awesome, but look at the gift. Do you think you found many gifts, too?
Oh, when you look into someone's eyes, that's where beloved resides. So you make that sometimes instantaneous connection. I mean, I didn't make those kind of connections before I was on the spiritual path. I thought, oh, she's got pretty eyes, or he's got great eyes, he's got nice eyebrows. Never did I suspect that, God, beloved, was there inside of them.
And I think when you look in, there's just a sense, truly you just stop and you just gaze. Pretty much that's what it is. And I can distinctly remember my second husband, someone had said to me, why did you marry him? And I said, oh, I saw the universe in his eyes. And they said, what? What? Yep. What are you talking about? And that was the last time I ever voiced that because of the response from it. And I just said, you know what? It's unnecessary to be able to share that because it really doesn't change or influence anyone or guide them or inspire them. So I'm just going to let it go. And it's just mine to know. And he was only there for a momentary time of my life. However, I knew, too, that there was something else that I had to do, and it was to help this other person. And I knew that. It was a mission that I had to be on.
Right. You share those kind of experiences with people that you can trust, who know that they're not going to laugh at you or say, what?
Right.
When you share something deeply, deep spiritual in nature, you do it with somebody that's going to say, wow, that was marvelous.
Well, you do it with someone that's on the FM station. Don't do it with someone on AM.
Exactly, because you don't want that kind of reaction. I don't even want to deal with those unless I'm in a teaching situation where, here these people are coming in. I don't know them, but they want to learn something different. Okay, now here's what I'm going to teach you. This is going to be different, very different than what you really normally know.
Right. Definitely, Emil, with my radio show over a decade now, many times people will come on the show and they'll say, well, I came on with my book to sell books. They started that way. And then it was, I came on my show because I wanted to talk to you and be able to share about my work. And then it's like, I'm coming on your show. I have no clue, but I'm showing up, and I'm going, awesome, And many times after the show, people will comment, they will say, I got way more than I bargained for. I have no clue what I talked about, but I know it was awesome. So don't you think that's how our engagements are with other people, too?
Oh, sure. I look forward to every time I sit down with somebody on the other side of a coffee table or a dinner table. And I sometimes have a couple of questions I want to ask them to stimulate their minds into, oh, wow, okay, I'll think about that, Grandpa. So, I don't go into a conversation with, what I want to plan out and talk to them about.
Right.
And it's like you, this radio show is spontaneous. It's something that's undesigned. We don't have any restrictions. One question leads to another, and conversation just keeps going on.
You shared in your book on Savannas, you said, I was always hungry. And I think that's so important. I think to just take that word and not always think about it as, we think about hungry, I'm food, that kind of thing. But think about it as hungry for life, hungry for love, hungry for change, hungry for compassion, hungry for connection. And that really is truly the definition of a seeker's life. So you and I have lived a seeker's life. And when you do that, I can distinctly remember, I grew up and we had a lot of violence. We had a lot of lack in my life. And I can remember always fidgeting around in people's pockets to try to find change, you know. I would do this at my relatives' houses or my family's house or whatever. And I would take all that and I would go to the candy store down the street to get candy because I was always hungry, you know. And I look back on that and I say, you know, I often wonder why the candy store man always gave me candy. Didn't he know he should say, oh, I know you love to come to get this candy every day, but would you like a sandwich with it too? Did he not think that I was hungry?
No, probably not.
Right, and when I stepped back at that, I said, that's how I see how you and I help and support others along the way, because it's sort of like, goodness, this child must be hungry because they're coming every day for candy with 2 and 3 pennies, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I think people are hungry out there. The ones that get on the FM station. And so those of us that have had a little bit more experience, you know, with my age at 88, I have had some. And so I want to share that. I want to let them know that, hey, it's okay if you went astray here. It's okay if you did some dumb things, because eventually you're going to get back on track and you're going to progress in your spiritual life, and you're becoming more humble, more graceful, more loving. All of those things just add up to this wonderful life. That's, you know, I've had a lot of problems just like you have in my early life. I mean, my folks weren't very loving. You know, they were very stoic. They didn't talk. They didn't share things. They didn't tell me they loved me a lot. I remember sitting on my dad's lap once in my whole life. And even when in my old age, when I used to go over there and talk to him, he would hug my kids, but he didn't know how to hug me. He didn't know what to do with his arms. So they didn't have those kind of skills that you and I have now, or that at least we profess to have, and we try to do them. We're trying to set the example for the younger people. We're trying to show them that, hey, look, if I did this, you can do it too. And that's just what the seers and the sheiks in the Upanishad said. You know, I traveled my way, my path to get to God. Now, don't trust me. Don't listen to my words. If you want to find God, you go your way. And I thought that was the greatest advice I've ever heard.
Yeah. It's so vitally important that when you're listening to our stories, that you say, oh, I had similar ideas or experiences. It's nothing is the same. You know, if we always think about it, quantum energy, it never is the same, never. So if we think about our world, our soul, our spirit is quantum energy, nothing is ever the same. It may be similar, it may seem to appear as, but it is never the same. And that's the really golden ticket. Because if you think about when people, I always talk about the web of the universe, the web of the cosmos, and we're all just merely glitter, all just cast up into it. You know, that's how our spirit and our soul is. So if we think of it that way, it doesn't overlay each other. You know, we think about a tapestry. Each thread has a different way, a different path, forms a different color, a different shade, and it unravels at different speeds, too, when you just let them fray on the bottom. So if you think about that, truly we are all part of, however, we are not meant to be the same as, to be a follower of anybody or anything, right?
Right. God didn't want to be boring and just have one type of flower out there. It's the same with us. Didn't want to have just one type of person, you know, all good looking, all beautiful, all rich.
Right.
In order for us to learn, we have to have this diversity in life. We have to have the rich with the poor, the angry with the loving, you know, so we can find our way through it.
There has to be a paradigm, you know what I mean? You know, in other words, we're not all wearing white, wearing Birkenstocks, do you know what I mean? It's just not going to happen. That's not where we're all trying to attain to either. Even when you get to a higher spiritual level, that is not the place that you stay at. You are consistently evolving. And if you think about it evolving in a web, you may fall down, go to the side, go to the upper left, maybe go to the other side. So, in other words, you're a bouncing ball. You're not just going up a ladder in the spiritual journey, don't you think?
Right, right. I mean, I know there's a lot of people that want to go into the woods or go into their cave and just become spiritual or stay spiritual. But Christ showed us that you've got to be amongst people to share what you've learned with everyone. You know, all great teachers do that. They want to share. They may not write books, but they'll tell their stories in that story form, really, parables, so that people understand what's been going on, you know, with them and with Christ or with that guru.
Right. Let's talk, Emil, for a second about out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences. I mean, who has not had those on their journey? I mean, I can tell you umpteen times I've had both of those. And it's so funny. I'll just share this with you. With out-of-body, I always do my out-of-body at night, you know. And I would, as soon as I hit my bed, I'm out, like 2 seconds, right? And one day I got up and my husband says, "Man, you are snoring like nobody's business last night. It was so loud. I had to go sleep in the other room." And I said, "Oh, that's because when I'm out of body, I leave my body snoring there, my physical body, so I know where to come back in." And he goes, "What?" But that's my way of saying, "Oh, that's where I'm supposed to be," you know.
Yeah,
and I think it's so vitally.
Connection.
Yeah, it's so vitally important to be able to understand that, because people get scared when you talk about out of body or near death. You know, when I talk about near death with the patients at end of life, it's, honey, you are going to walk up to the door, you're going to drop all of this physical stuff that you've been carrying, walk through the door, and the angels will swoop you up on the other side. So you're never going to be alone. You're not going to be broken and defeated. You're not going to dissolve or whatever. The you that is you is always there. Yeah. Might both of these circumstances, you know, play out in yours too?
Well, the out-of-body experience, I had that when I was very young, and it frightened me because I never heard of it. And when I had the experience, I thought I was going to die. So I wrote my little note to my mom telling her that, you know, I'm going to die. And when I didn't, after 3 months or so, I then flushed that little note down the toilet, but I still didn't understand the experience. It was only later in life when I started reading about Robert Monroe's experiences with out-of-body that I thought, oh, so that's what happened to me. I got scared because I didn't know better. But, you know, like you, were you having those experiences all through your younger life too?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So they were consistent, where mine was just a once it happened, and so I was afraid, you know. But here, I wasn't around, of course. Were you around anybody that was spiritual that could kind of guide you?
No, not at all.
Wow.
And see, that's what I think is important, too. As we're talking about these topics today, it's that we've not had what I call spiritual training. We've had religious dogma. We've had physical and human stories. We look back in history, and we always say it repeats itself. And we have those who are around us guiding us to tell us, this is the way to go. Make sure you stay behind me in line so you don't get your arm chopped off. You know, remember when you were a kid, don't put your arm out the window, it's going to get chopped off, you know.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think the idea is that we have never had what I call spiritual training. Over the decade, I've really shared all of these ideas, inspiration to guide people as a process of spiritual training. And what that means is we are here to inspire, but we have to say, it's okay what you're feeling, tell me, and maybe I can help you categorize it, make some sense out of it, and maybe go back there and see what else it's going to tell you. Isn't that what our stories are about?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. In fact, I believe that so much that I actually inserted it in my love series of books where I thought, excuse me,
that's okay.
relationships relationships are very necessary in life, and kids need to know how to relate to other kids and to their parents and school teachers. So there needs to be a class of some sort, instruction of some sort. And so I'm professing.
That's what we're doing here.
Yeah. And then also with the spiritual teachings, I also include that in my books because people do need to know what spirituality is as opposed to religion or religiosity. So, yes, there's a great deal of a need for the spiritual teachings. And I think, yes, you're absolutely right. That's what you're doing. That's what I'm doing with this talk, with my book, with my memoirs, and with my other books, too. So I'm just trying to help people through the mess.
Yeah. And, I had a reading at one time with an angel reader, and she says, Jeanette, you're leading the line. And instantly, I had a picture because my physical body was just beaten to holy heck. It was like, oh, gosh, it was just in all kinds of trouble. And it's always found that my physical body really takes this hit on this journey. It's because when I saw a vision of I'm walking with a sickle through the jungle, and I'm kind of like clearing the path. Do you know what I mean? So I'm clearing the path of everything to be able to show you the way so we can get there. But I'm the first in line to be able to say, what's hitting us now? What's hitting us now? How could it appear? How does it show up in your body? How does it show up in your mind? What is your story all about? So as you go through as a sickle, it's like, yes, your physical body is taking the really brunt of it because the spiritual journey is on robot kind of thing. It's just going and going, and that's where it's going, don't you think?
Yeah, there's a great story about Ramakrishna. Later in his life, before he died, he had cancer of the throat, and it was very painful for him. And his initiates, Vivekananda, used to take him to the doctor, and he'd always be very happy to go. But Vivekananda kept asking him, well, you're so spiritual, why don't you just cure yourself?
Right,
Yeah, and Ramakrishna looked at him and says, well, why should I worry about this body? What I'm worried about is my spirit and your spirit. The body is just something that I'm going to shed. And it's also teaching that, hey, I, as a great spiritual person, am still going to die some way. So this is what I have chosen to die by, to show you that, yes, I can still attain very deep spiritual states if I'm sick. If I have cancer, if I have pain, I can still attain that. And that's really marvelous because when I'm sick or I have pain, I can't get to that spiritual spot.
Yeah. It's so defining to be able to say that. I was sick recently. I mean, blowout. I mean, I don't think I got out of the recliner for 3 weeks. I didn't eat or I didn't drink. I didn't do anything. I was just so ill. And when I came out of it, I said, that's another energy upgrade. That's what that is. So I'm just clearing the path more. It's sort of like when you really hit the tsunami of energy that's coming into the earth at this time. Do you think you're not going to be affected? Absolutely you are. And if I'm at the head of the line, I'm really getting it pretty well forceful, And it just shut me down. It was high energy forces. And I said, okay. Got it. That's what that is.
When you were shut down, were you able to attain spiritual states, or did you have your experiences, or were you just completely taken over by your illness?
I was just in silence. And when that silence is there, to me, silence is my space and time. That's my everything. So silence and just looking out the window at nature, that's it. But that's always been my quiet place, my source. My source is that. And
your peace.
Right. So in other words, I live a life of peace, calm, and solace, as we call it. And when I'm in that space and time, the other things don't matter. Like in that 3 weeks, it was like it didn't matter what went on around me. It didn't matter that I got up and maybe, made the bed, or I got up and did this, that, or the other. None of the human stuff made any sense to do it. And to eat or to drink, it was like, no, that's not on my plate today. I don't need to do that. But I also just showed up. I opened up my eyes in the day. I went closed them at the end of the night. I said, okay. However, when you come out of that, then there's a lot of repair work that needs to be done, especially after you get blasted by that energy, because now the repair work is, okay, pull out my 10,000 supplements. I'm going to take one of this today. Maybe tomorrow I'll take 10 of that. Maybe I'll take this. Maybe I'll have none the next day. It's about whatever you're being called to do for that moment, to do the slight repairs and maybe just hold your body here a little bit longer. You know, someone had said something to me yesterday. I don't recall what it was. And I said, you know, I'm just doing my best to keep myself on the earth a little longer.
Yeah, so you can share what you can, you know, with people.
Right.
Yeah, I know I was sick with a fever for a whole week. It was ranging around 103. And I couldn't do anything but just sit there like you were doing.
That's right.
But I can't remember thinking. I can't remember doing. And, you know, ironically, no, I won't go into that because that's too negative. Yes, it was just like I was surviving, but my mind wasn't focused on beloved. It was just open. That's all. That's all I can say. I don't know if that was an experience of spirituality for me or it was just survival, you know, from that ravaging.
Well, all of the energy, you know, you see all the energy in the world coming at us. You know, there's solar storms, you know, there's all of this quantum stuff going on. You look at it, they turned on that CERN, that electron thing out in Switzerland or wherever it is. It's a lot of really energy forces going on. And if we're an energy being, and we really, truly do need to come to that to be able to do this experience, to shift yourself out of I'm this human body and this is who I am and I'm carrying all this stuff, to I am a spiritual being and this is a physical body. When you get to that point, everything affects you. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed times you could go to the grocery store and you're like, you come home and some days you're so exhausted you could barely even put away the groceries. And that's because you've interacted with all of the energy in the store. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or you know, you turn around and like I would be in the hospital, you know, for work, and it would be like, oh, I would say to the person with me, oh gosh, do you hear that woman? She's screaming over there. She's so afraid to be alone. And they're like, I don't hear anything, you know? Or another time I went in to the hospital and I was in a certain office across from the ICU. And I was having a test done, and all of a sudden I started gasping and couldn't catch my breath. They ended up taking me to the ER. And what it was is that someone was having an event in the ICU, and I felt it. Correct. I felt it, and then I had to get myself out of that situation, and then it took me a while again to recover. So a lot of times these energies and things that happen to us, we say, well, is it going to take me out? And I always have that question. I'll say to my, you know, I'll talk to somebody else, say, I wonder if this is my exit event. Do you know what I mean? How am I going to exit this world? But then I say, okay, whatever, because I don't have that fear of death whatsoever. So, Emil, can you share perhaps maybe your thoughts on that story? Because I think that many people are having similar things, but they don't know how to vocalize it to anyone else.
Well, I really liked what you were talking about because to me, I know that we're all connected within Beloved. So, you know, you felt what that woman was experiencing. You know, I think we can all do that. We all have that ability, but we are too busy. We're still on the AM stations.
Right.
So if you really think about it, that God has created us, and so we're within this God mind, so we are able to feel all of that stuff. And if you aren't, usually I think because we're on the AM, we're protecting ourselves.
Right.
We don't feel that other person's pain or that other person's, emotional strife. When you become empathic, when you become spiritual, when you step on the path, there's so many things that impinge upon your daily life that it's difficult sometimes to navigate it.
Oh, it sure
is,
yeah. You have to protect
yourself as well. We have to take care of ourselves. It's just like, I've learned like 5 different modalities of healing. And first thing that we learned was, don't use your energy, use God's energy, and don't connect with that person's pain. That's let them connect with their own pain. Let them identify, okay, I've got this ache in my knee. Why is that present? There's a reason for everything that happens to us. No matter whether it's an illness or whether it's a pain. If you have a lower backache, who's not supporting you? Who's giving you pain? So yes, there's all of these things that can happen, and I don't think very many people are aware of that. But I think with your particular podcast here, and with other things that are going on, with different books that are coming out, people are becoming more aware of these things.
Absolutely, and I think it's very important to be able to share our stories. As we share our stories, people will say, something will twinge in them, and they might not even know the words that we spoke. They may not even know what we were talking about. They just know that something in them they felt, and that's what the goal is, right?
They connect somehow with you. It clicks. Oh, yeah, that's happened to me too. So I'm not that crazy. I'm not that stupid.
Right. Let's talk about that in closing. When you start to get on this path, you find that your tribe, those people around you, disappear. And I'm like, awesome. The first few times I was like, oh no, what's happening? But after that it was like, awesome. Like, forget about deep cleaning my house. I just know I'm going to always be moving, so it's okay. I clean what I need to clean and be done with it. I'm not going to go around with a toothbrush in the little craters around my window. I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah.
So I think the idea is can we understand that we are fleeting, we are changing, we are evolving, and I always like to say, welcome to dancing in the ethers. And when you can dance in the ethers, you're not worried about your window ledge that's not clean. You know what I mean?
Right. I remember way back when I met this lady who had a near-death experience, and she was involved with Edgar Casey's project there. Anyway, she was telling me that it took 7 years before she finally got comfortable with herself and tried to convince her family of what happened, in this near-death experience. They said, oh, that can't be. And so she struggled for 7 years, and she finally just said, I know what happened. I'm happy what happened, and I don't really care if they don't accept me. And that's the way I was. I didn't have the near-death experience, but as I discovered, that I was on a path and looking for my own self plus God, it took me about 7 years to finally come to the satisfaction of, okay, I don't need them. I don't really need to convince them. I know what's happening to me. I'm on my path, and they're on their path.
And do you know what that is, Emil? That is when you have healed or are healing as much as possible the ancestral lineage, and you have now said, I'm now working on my spiritual lineage to be able to work on that one of your many lifetimes. That's what that is. Right. Because once that's gone away, it's no longer necessary. The idea of my father, my mother, my kids, my this, my that. And I'll say, I don't even see that. It doesn't, for me, it doesn't show up. It never has. Don't know why. It just hasn't. I'm sure it has to do with the work that I do, that it was unnecessary, but it just does not show up. I don't have ownership of anyone or anything. And when you get to that point, you say, okay, you're working in a different space and time. Yes, I'm working in a different frequency. And to understand that, and it's going back to the idea of walking with the sickle in the jungle, pretty much, I'm ahead of it. And I think to understand is to find people who have stories that are at the head of the line, that have been in the trenches, so to speak, for a decade or a few decades or perhaps a lifetime, this lifetime, and to listen to them. And that's what you're talking about today, and we're shared on the stories, and also about your book, is these things that we're saying, we're in the front lines, we get it, here's what it's about. And that's what we wanted to share today, yes?
Absolutely. And I thank you for having me on the show. It's been a pleasure and a great experience. And I really like your philosophy there of it's not mine, and it's not different. It's ours. We're all part of the same creation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, I just don't even feel or sense anything of that. It's almost as if you would stand a light post on the corner and say, shine. That's what I do. You know what I mean? And it's just, it's, I find most of my time, I feel like I'm standing on the top of the mountain with my eyes open, my mouth hanging wide open and my arms out, and just say, just breathing. That's it. There isn't anything else. You know,
whoever wants to come within your arms, it's fine.
Right. You know, it's so funny. I'll tell you this in closing. But one of my web person, she had said, you need to write up your bio and all of this stuff. And I struggled with that thing for maybe, I would say, at least the better part of a few years. And I never did write it up because I would write I am, and then I would go, what is it you want to hear from me? I have no clue what a bio is. So are you asking me where my human body has journeyed? Is that what you want to know? You know, because the two to me didn't connect. It was like, no, I never did put up a bio because there wasn't one. You know, being in service, it's just, I'm just the light, I'm just a spirit, I'm just a soul. And that's good enough for me. Don't you think that's what you also feel?
Oh, yes. You know, but sometimes you have to do that bio for business. Like in back of the book, they said, well, you got to have your biography back there. So I look at my life in what's happened to me spiritually. In fact, I started out with a journal, and I thought this is going to be one about my family. This is what's happened. All of a sudden, that got left behind. I started, interpreting my dreams, putting them down, and then talking about my spiritual experiences. And now, all of a sudden, I don't even do that anymore. And one of my friends asked me, why not? I said, well, because I'm writing about my experiences in my book. I'm trying to share my stories. And so other people can learn, that this is possible as well. And this is what we're really created out of, and how we're created, and why we're created.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've always said, if you can look back at your life experiences and find all the struggling ones and say to them, call in their energy and say, thank you so much for journeying with me on this life's path. I thank you for the experience, and I now set you free. Once you do that,
wonderful,
you are honoring everything and anything that has shown up in your life. Anything, even if it was the worst thing in the world, you're honoring it, and you're saying thank you, but you're also releasing its energy so that you can now go forward. And I think that's so vitally important.
Yes, that's a magnificent prayer. All of us should have that same philosophy.
Yeah. It's about holding on to it, Emil. Well, Emil, can you share with the listeners how to find out more information about your work? That would be wonderful.
Oh, sure. They can go and find my books on Amazon. They just put in my name, Emil Toth, with the word love or cross, and my books will come up.
Very good. Well, Emil, it was such a pleasure to have you with us today. We thank you so much for sharing your stories, and your inspirations, because I think so many people will say, I just felt something, and take that something and go out and find your own journey. So we really thank you.
Well, I thank you for having me, Dr. Jeanette. It's been a pleasure and a marvelous experience.
As we danced in the ethers, right, Emil?
Right.
Well, thank you so much. If you'd like to find out more information about Emil Toth, again, his book is Walk With Me in Swamps, on Savannas, Up Mountains to God, a spiritual memoir. Please do click on the link on the bottom of today's show page to go to Amazon to be able to find his books. And it is about being able to say, I'm okay, no matter what's going on. Just find someone to talk to, find some inspiration in words, go out and be able to sense the energy around you. And eventually you will come to knowing that you are guided, you are unconditionally loved, and yes, you are on your own path. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Dr. Jeanette-Gallagher. Until tomorrow, have a great day.
Today we discussed many life-changing concepts. Who do you turn to, and how do you know what is best when faced with a health crisis? Dr. Jeanette is a patient advocate. She listens to the patient, the doctors, and the family, clarifies the health issues and concerns, then helps the patient make the best choices going forward. If you would like help implementing change into your life and health, we can talk and see where you are stuck and how to improve the quality of your life. Check the link on the bottom of today's show page or visit dr.jeanette-gallagher.com to schedule a phone appointment today.